Welcome back. So I'll be talking about a historian who discovered or uncovered gynecology's brutal roots in slavery. And her name is Deirdre Owens, and she is a professor in the history of medicine at the University of Nebraska. And she's an author of the book that Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology. So back in 2020, she was on her book tour and she was at Berkeley and she was interviewed there. So I'm reading that to you, Berkeley News. In your book, you uncover the ways in which the origins of American gynecology are intimately linked to slavery. Would you describe how slavery helped drive the development of U.S. reproductive medicine? Owens, when the Constitution banned the international African slave trade, there became an issue with how the U.S. was going to maintain and grow this lucrative system of slavery. The solution was to concentrate on natural increases, which simply meant making sure that enslaved women had children who lived past the age of 1. Because slavery was a condition that was passed to the child from the mother. What this did was lay at the feet of black women an added responsibility to have more children. In addition, because modern gynecology advanced quite rapidly in the South, these doctors, many of whom were slave owners themselves, had access to black bodies, particularly black women's bodies, to experiment on, to examine, and to, in their words, quote, cure or, quote, fix diseases and disorders. You coined the term medical superbodies to describe how black women were seen by white medical men in the 19th century. What were some of these conflicting views and beliefs? I coined the term medical superbodies because black women stood at the crossroads of being a universal norm for healing, because clearly these doctors could use these women to cure any women, and yet their bodies still held these racialized fictions. For example, that black women are more hypersexual or lascivious, black women don't experience pain, black women are immodest. All of those things tie into this belief that somehow black women were intellectually inferior to white women, but also physically stronger, without any linkage being made to the fact that most black women were agricultural slaves. And me talking, of course, your body adapts to whatever work you're doing. John Marion Sims is known the father of American gynecology for pioneering the repair of the fascisto-vaginal fistula in the 1840s. Yet you argue that 10 or so black bondwomen who lived and worked in his hospital should rightly be known as the mothers of American gynecology. What role did these women play in the establishment of this field? James Marion Sims, who was known as the father of gynecology after he died, was abandoned by the 2 white male surgical assistants who worked with him. And so, like any other slave owner, he said, "Oh, let me train these women." But once again, there's the racial hypocrisy that crops up. Women were supposed to be a subset of men, not as intelligent as men. Surely black women were even lower on the kind of racial hierarchy. And yet he was training these black women to serve him in the same capacity as white men. These developments in gynecology did not come about simply because Sims was a hard-working genius, but Sims was dependent upon a staff, and that staff was a group of experimental patients who he also owned or leased. And so if he's rightly one of the fathers of American medicine, then so are those women, who were the team of surgical assistants and nurses that actually helped him develop the successful surgical technique. You mentioned that one of your goals in the book is to give face and voice to women who were experimented on and treated by early American gynecologists. Do you have any specific stories that you learned and that you'd like to share? In my book, I'm centering women who, by and large, were illiterate, so they didn't leave written sources. So I'm trying to make sense of their lives through the men who either owned them or experimented on them. And that makes it difficult to humanize these women and the ways that are needed to make them three-dimensional flesh and blood historical actors and not just flat slaves. There is one case with Nanny, who was a pregnant black enslaved woman who was described as fragile by the doctor. Nanny had a community of people rallying behind her who went to the doctor on their own intention and volition and said, quote, Nanny is fragile because she was made to breed a lot, end quote. For me, it shows the sense of community and care and the protectiveness that the slave community had for their members. I thought that was really telling, touching, and also a teachable moment to show that even in the midst of their own bondage, they still were advocating for her medically. Black women still face significant disparities in healthcare settings. Does your work help us understand these ongoing inequities and discrimination? You know, at first I wasn't sure. When you write a dissertation, it's not even a book yet. So you write it alone in isolation and you don't know how people will respond. When it became a book and was published and there was such a positive response from various community members, I was really shocked by the number of nurses who were like, quote, we never learned this. I wish we had known this before we were taught Florence Nightingale in nursing. They told, end quote, they told me that now they understand why patients are reticent to see them, or they understand now the ways that race, class, ethnicity, immigration status, or nationality are all linked together to a longer and deeper history that is rooted, unfortunately, in exploitation and some really questionable ethical practices. Doctors also are telling me that the book is helpful because this helps them to put the pieces of the puzzle together in understanding why the practice of blaming and victimizing patients for their own bad health or ill health or illnesses or sicknesses is something people are concerned about. It lets me know that despite the ways that some historians like to think that America's a history wasteland or people aren't interested in history, there's actually a real desire and thirst for knowledge, and people want to know history in order to better understand the legacy of medical racism that exists today. I hope you like history and the purposes of understanding. Thank you so much for listening.